Hey everyone, and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. Today we're going to be talking about the Mythic Progression race. It only started on the 28th, and thanks to a bunch of Russians, it's actually finished. So, the main bit of the news today is big congratulations to Exorsus, who got the world first kill on Xavius Mythic difficulty in the Emerald Nightmare. In this video, I'll be talking about their kill, I'll be talking about the actual length of this Mythic Progression race, I'll talk about some of the factors there, my thoughts on it, and I'm also going to roll in my kind of little mini review of the Emerald Nightmare as a raid instance for World of Warcraft. So first of all, Exorsus did manage to clear the entire instance by a pretty significant margin, and they did it in a rather extreme time. In the EU servers, Emerald Nightmare opened up on the 28th, and 17 hours after clearing through Nethendra, I believe very early on the morning of the 29th, Exorsus actually managed to get their kill of Xavius. Now, what is particularly interesting is that Exorsus players have actually reported that Xavius felt very undertuned in comparison to Cenarius, who is the 6th boss. Now, we're going to get some more confirmation on that because currently Method are actually progressing against Xavius now, so we'll see what Method's thoughts are once they actually manage to clear that boss. Overall, though, most guilds are still at 4 or 5 out of 7 in their mythic progression. I know pretty much all the American guilds are in and around that, and the reason why you see all these guilds be at 4 or 5 out of 7 is that the last 2 bosses of Emerald Nightmare are quite a step up in difficulty in comparison to the first 5, who really, in my view, are kind of training bosses, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, a lot of people have been talking about how short this mythic race has been, and on their live blog of the events, Method very astutely pointed out that this is actually one of the, this is the fastest race that there has ever been. Kel'Thuzad lasted for 3 days, and this has lasted for 17 hours. A bit more than 17 hours, because I assume Exorcist took them a little bit of time to clear through Nethendra. Now, we need to compare this, I think, to Highmaul, and another thing that we need to do is remember that this actually isn't an entire raid tier. I think it's important to bear that in mind. So comparing things to Highmaul, well, Highmaul's world first was Paragon. Now, Paragon got their world first Highmaul on the 14th of December 2014. Highmaul Mythic was released on the 10th of December 2014, so it took about 4 days to clear through Highmaul and kill Imperator Margok on Mythic difficulty, which, 4 days, not that much. I assume, that wasn't a fresh reset that it took to kill the final boss. And I've seen some talk in the internet, people thinking, well, Emerald Nightmare, it's probably going to be 1 or 2 resets long, and it certainly was a lot shorter than most people actually thought. And there is, I think, a tinge of disappointment out there with quite a few players, because a thing that we really look forward to in World of Warcraft is this mythic race, seeing, how the people playing at the top of their game manage to clear the most difficult content that's actually in the game. However, I'm not particularly perturbed on a personal level about this. I'm not, I don't think this is the end of the world or anything. And the reason why is that we do have more raid content on the way. We've got the Trial of Valor coming up, I assume quite soon. And then we have Nighthold. Now, Nighthold is to Highmaul Nighthold is to Emerald Nightmare as Highmaul was to Blackrock Foundry. So really, the proper progression, the proper race is going to be for Nighthold. However, Nighthold is coming out in January of this year, so we will actually have to wait a little bit for the Nighthold. Emerald Nightmare, similar to Highmaul, is really just an introduction raid to the expansion to get people up to speed, get new people in, and, have basic mechanics. But we do have to think about how it was even faster to clear through Emerald Nightmare than it was for Highmaul, and I think there's a few different factors there. One could be that Exorsus just absolutely, hit it out of the park, did amazingly, played just, to a ridiculously high level, and therefore cleared it before everyone else. I think we'll get a really big confirmation of whether that was or was not the case if we see Method actually able to follow up on that kill. And literally 14 minutes after recording that, Method have just reported that they did indeed clear Xavius, bringing them up to 7-7, giving Method the world's second. So big congratulations to Method for their achievement, and I think this also does somewhat confirm that Xavius might actually be a little bit undertuned overall. But there are some other things. First of all, apparently there's undertuning on Xavius. Now, if that is the case, it's quite disappointing. So Xavius is apparently easier than Cenarius, that would be like having Korra being harder than Imperator Margok in Highmaul. So that is a little bit disappointing, and that's really the kind of thing that would make this race 1 or 2 resets shorter than maybe a lot of players would actually like it to be. Another thing that we need to think about, though, is balancing, actually. Yes, class balance, but I think also the balancing of some of the systems that have been going on in World of Warcraft. So, number one, we have to think about the legendary system. Now, I've got to imagine that all of these, high-end mythic rating guilds have been farming their legendaries as much as they can. Some of them will have benefited from the bug, but others, I think, will have just been running that many mythics, that many keystones, that many heroics, to the point where everyone in that raid pretty much has a legendary item. Now, Blizzard, I'm pretty sure, said that the first raid is not balanced around legendaries in the past, and I'm assuming that when it came to how Blizzard were going to be balancing the mythic difficulty, it could actually be the case that they weren't balancing for Mythic World first, they were balancing for most of the guilds who were just, doing a foray into Mythic. That could be the case. So I'm sure the legendaries have had some sort of effect on the balance. Maybe Blizzard didn't really think that through as much. Maybe they got some of their predictions and their numbers wrong. Another element as well is that we do see a lot more randomness in the gear with Legion, so it could be that some outliers have contributed to some guilds having near Nighthold levels of gear because they got particularly lucky with Warforged on a few characters. That's absolutely a possibility. And another possibility is that we have a new form of split running in the game that offers some pretty damn good gear. Now, if you think about the Mythic Plus stuff, right, as you know, the loot is based on upgrading a keystone. It's not actually based on your character. That means that if you are a big Mythic guild, you've got maybe a lot of money to pay people with to come in to upgrade their keystones, you can get a lot of characters split run through many Mythics, getting many upgrades, many shots at legendary items, many shots at gear that in the first week of Mythic Plus was limited to a base item level of 850, but of course, as we know, can upgrade to a significantly higher item level. And because they're extremely skilled mythic rating guilds, they'll be able, I would assume, to be clearing up to a Mythic Plus 10 keystone, which will give them, 880, 885 gear from the weekly chest they would have opened just before heading in to the Mythic version of Emerald Nightmare. So I think there's a few different factors there that maybe have contributed to this being a shorter than normal sort of Mythic race. That said, I'm not particularly worried about it overall, because I think that the real things to pay attention about they're in the future with the Nighthold, with the Trial of Valor. Perhaps it is just the case that they kind of fucked up on Xavius, and that he should have been harder. And maybe if Xavius was a bit harder, it would have taken 4 or 5 days to clear through Emerald Nightmare Mythic, which would have meant that it would actually be on par with Highmaul. So really, I think this is likely just a Highmaul-like situation, and we'll see the real race actually appear in the Nighthold and the Trial of Valor. That said, Trial of Valor is only 3 bosses, so we'll need to see if they really do try to make those mythics rock hard. With that covered, though, I just want to go through my own experience in the Emerald Nightmare. So I'm actually doing my first heroic raid of Emerald Nightmare tonight. We did try earlier on last week, but we basically just did what should have been a normal raid, but on heroic difficulty, where, we just invited everyone who was online. It didn't really work out that well. Then a few days later, we headed in on normal, and we cleared 5 out of 7. I think with relative ease, because people had only prepared for the first 3 bosses. So going into some of the bosses, we pretty much had to make sure that all 16, I think, all 16 people were up to speed over raid chat, without people looking at the guides. So even with those factors, we still found that it was a very, very clearable instance. However, the expectation is that Cenarius and Xavius are a lot more of a challenge. There was a second night, I believe they killed Cenarius, but I was not there because I was busy with work stuff. So overall, we've seen that on normal mode, it's basically, it's a bit of a joke, right? And it's designed so that it is getting people through it. However, while I do think that normal mode is very, very, very easy indeed, what it did do is it did give all of the members of our raid a pretty good look at the various different bosses. And it is also worth keeping in mind that our raid is, maybe half made of heroic players, who are, really good gear, min-maxing, reviewing their logs after raids, doing all of that stuff. It's maybe half those players and then half players who are just, a bit more casual in terms of how they want to play World of Warcraft. So we probably went in with a group that was better than your average normal group, and that's why we were able to clear those 5 so easily. That said, like, if you're going in with a really well-geared group, you're going to get 7 out of 7 normal in one night, in all likelihood, is what I would think there. Now, going into the heroics, from what I've done of heroic Nathendra, yeah, it seems like an easy boss. We died due to stupid reasons, but overall, I do think that this is a sort of an easier style of raid, and that makes a good deal of sense for very similar reasons to why I really liked Highmaul. Now, a lot of people are going to say, look, you just like Highmaul because it was easy and because you progressed well. Well, first of all, progression is generally fun, but obviously when it's too easy, then it's just not an experience that has longevity. The reason why I liked Highmaul is it was a really good intro raid for teaching people stuff. You had your movement fights, you had your, fights that taught people individual responsibility, a lot of stuff like that, which I think sets up a very good raiding scene for the rest of the expansion. Now, one issue with Warlords is that, Blackrock Foundry, I think it was a good raid, but it did have some issues on launch with the gear and difficulty and things like that. And, it was a bit of a disappointing expansion overall in terms of player retention, so they maybe didn't get to reap the rewards of teaching players the mechanics and doing all of that. I think very good work with Highmaul. So, yeah, so far, I've thought the bosses are simple enough, but I think in a good way that makes their mechanics easy to read, which overall means that it's very easy to get a handle of what's going on in the raid. And that's what, in my view, an introduction raid should be, because it is an introduction raid. It does not drop tier gear. Now, it does drop some really nice gear, some better itemized gear, sure, but our main tier progression is going to be happening in the future, in the Nighthold, in and around January 2017. So that's kind of the lay of the land. Overall, I had good fun in Emerald Nightmare. I don't see it as being the most serious thing on the planet. However, I do sympathize with, the people who are disappointed that the race has been so short, and I do think that it's probably a mistake that Xavius was undertuned. And yeah, that's an unfortunate situation, but I don't think that the sky is falling. Of course, though, if that is something that you're super geared up for, and you know that, well, it's going to be 3 or 4 months until the proper tier raid comes out, then I think that is a feeling of disappointment that, that's absolutely something that can be empathized with completely. But yeah, they are my views on everything. Big congratulations to Exorsus. No matter how easy or hard the content was, they were still the best at doing it, and they clearly won and beat so many other guilds because their execution was just a level above or whatever the other people. So big grats to them, and yeah, let's just roll on to the upcoming raids and see how things go. Hopefully, we do not see a repeat of this situation with the Nighthold. So hopefully the Nighthold does take quite a while to defeat. That's definitely what I'd like to have happen. But right now for the training raid, I'm really not that concerned about the whole situation. But anyway, that's really it for me. Let me know what you think over on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.